scripture reading today comes from the first chapter of Mark, verses 40 through 45. It's on page 33 in your pew Bibles, right at the bottom of the page there. Oh, I guess it's also printed in your bulletin, so. And a leper came to him, begging him, and kneeling, he said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I do choose, be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them." But when he went out and began to proclaim it freely, to spread the word so that Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
This has always been one of my favorite passages. I'm not sure, I can't find my confirmation Bible, but I think this might have been my confirmation passage. I love the imagery we see here. We see Jesus, we see the creator of the universe stopping and bending over and reaching out to touch one person because he was moved by compassion for that person. God, who has everything in the universe on his mind, has time to stop and reach and touch one person. But for right now, I'm going to focus on this man. We don't know very much about him. But what we do see is we see the brokenness in this man. It says he's begging and kneeling. This is a man that threw himself on his knees in front of the feet of Christ and said, "I know you have the power to make me whole. I know you have the power to make me clean, if you will it." I think that a lot of us in this room, me definitely, knows what that feels like. Knows what it is to be on our knees in front of Christ, saying, "Whatever. I know if you're willing, you can make my wife healthy. I know if you're willing it, you'll let my son be born healthy." We've been in that position, a lot of us have. And I want to stop and think of what brought this man to this position. What we do know about this man is that we know when he lived, we know where he lived. He lived in Nazareth. He lived not far from Galilee. This is very early in Jesus' ministry. And Galilee and Nazareth, this is the sticks of Judea. This is out in the middle of nowhere. And Judea is the sticks of the Roman Empire. It's out in the middle of nowhere. So this is one man in a very small, insignificant part of the world. And he was most likely a farmer, a herder. He would have sheep, he would have had goats, something like this. And those probably would have belonged to his family. His oldest brother or his father, or maybe even his grandfather, would have been in charge of the whole family and their flocks. And they would live together and work together to raise these animals. They probably all lived together in one house too. And this isn't 5 or 6 bedrooms, big mansion. We're talking probably 4 rooms. One of them was a kitchen and one of them was a stable. And the family lived in these other 2 rooms. It makes me think of maybe Thanksgiving or Christmas when we go and see the family. And we have the brothers and the sisters and their children and maybe an uncle and a mother-in-law, and they're all in the house. And I don't know, leaving that house, we might have felt a little relief, personally. But this is all this man had known. He had grown up his whole life in 2 rooms with probably 24 people in them. They were all close family members, with his dad's mother-in-law in the house, and with his grandmother and his brother's wife and her children, and dozens and dozens of people. He probably had a wife and children of his own. And we don't know how long he was sick, but we know he had leprosy. So that means living in this house with all these people that loved him, and he started feeling sick. And then one day, these sores started to show up. And on that day, he would have gone to the local synagogue and found whoever was in charge there, the priest, the rabbi, and they would have said, that's leprosy. And he would have been declared unclean. Because they had an idea that this was a disease that would spread. But they didn't think that this was a virus or a bacteria that would spread. This was sin. This man was wearing a mark of sin that would spread to his family, to his loved ones, if they kept him in that house. And this wasn't even necessarily his sin. This could have been his father's sin. This could have been his older brother's sin. This could have been his wife's sin. It could have been his son's sin. But he was marked with it. And so that day, he would have not been allowed back in that house. His wife wouldn't have acknowledged him as her husband anymore. His children wouldn't hug him, talk to him, speak to him. The only life he ever knew was that family that house with a family full of love. And now, he didn't have any of that anymore. He would have been completely by himself, completely alone, with no financial means. No one's going to give him a job. He's not going to get his piece of the herd from the family because he's not part of the family anymore. So he would have been alone and begging at the gates of this city when he heard that Jesus had come. Now, we don't know how long he was sick, but it could have been years. I think it might have been to put him in this state of desperation where he's begging and kneeling in front of Christ. Years alone in front of this gate, begging for enough food. I'm guessing he had gone to every doctor and charlatan that had come by and given him whatever money he could scrape together for any cure he could have promised. He might have even been able to get enough money together and gone to Jerusalem and gone to the temple and made a sacrifice in the hopes that that would make him clean. And none of these things had taken away his illness. So he sat by this city every day and begged for enough food to eat. And I have to almost think that he was happier on the days when he didn't get enough money to go into this town and get food. Because when that happened, when he wanted to go into town to just buy his food, he would have had to walk up to the gate and yell out to the guard on top of the gate, unclean, I'm unclean. And the guards would have yelled it from the top of that gate, unclean, unclean. And people would jump out of the way when he walked down the street. People would jump into doorways and pull their robes in. Because if he had touched the hem of their cloak, they would have been unclean too. And we see an interesting reversal of this later in the gospel, where the unclean woman touches the hem of Jesus' cloak and is made clean. And that's a real play on this idea that someone just touching the hem of your cloak would make you unclean too. So this man had probably gone years with the only human interaction being people recoiling from him in fear and hiding away from him in doorways. And so he's sitting outside the city gates this day. And the other beggars out there say, hey, there's a holy man coming through the city today. People say he can heal people. People say he turned water into wine. He can heal us. And I bet some of those beggars are so jaded, so tired of hearing about holy men and doctors that can heal them, that they said, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to walk into a crowded city and see people jump away from me to just be disappointed again by another person claiming to be a holy man, claiming they can heal me just to get the 2 coppers I have in my pocket. But this man said, no. I know there's something special about this man. I'm desperate. Anything that will help me, I'm going to give this a try. So he came into the city, and there was a big crowd. And he walks up to this crowd, and I bet there are people kind of hiding behind Jesus a little bit. But he falls on his knees and says, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. I know you can. And then Jesus, God himself in human form, reaches down. This man is kneeling. So I have to imagine that Jesus had to stoop. God bent over to touch this man and and say, I'm willing, be clean. Now, did Jesus have to touch this man? Did Jesus have to bend over and touch him to make him clean? No. This is the same man that shouts into a tomb and watches a dead man walk out. This is the man that heals a woman who touches the hem of his cloak. This is the word of creation. Go to John 1. He's the Logos, the divine word of creation. He spoke, and all the universe was created. He didn't need to touch this man to physically heal him. He could have shouted from 3 cities over, and this man's leprosy would have left. But I think that this man needed Jesus to touch him. He didn't need Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, to touch him. He needed Jesus of Nazareth. He needed Jesus Bar Joseph. He needed a man who wasn't afraid to stoop down and touch him and say,
Is that Lucy?
He needed a human being to come down and touch him as a fellow human being. He had been told for years now that he was something less than a human being. He was something less than everyone around him. They gave him less regard than they would give in their cattle and their sheep. He'd been told again and again, you're not human. And to have a human being, someone revered and respected, to bend down, stop, and touch him, gave him such a sense of belonging, of community, something so new and so refreshing that it restored him. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. It said to this man, you are human again. And furthermore, he's clean. He can go back. He can be with his family. He can be with his wife. He can be with his kids again. He can get his share of the inheritance, get the food and the money that these herds of his father would give him. He wouldn't have to beg. He wouldn't have to be alone anymore. And that's why Jesus says, don't tell people I did this. Don't go around shouting that Jesus here healed me. He says, go to the temple. Give them the right sacrifice so they can take credit for making you clean. Because if you don't do that, all this stuff I just gave you back is going to go away. You'll still be unclean. You won't be able to go home. You won't be able to be back with your family. It will all go away if you don't let the priest take credit for this. But this man was so changed by his encounter with Jesus that he couldn't do that. He had to run and shout openly that Jesus had touched him, that Jesus had made him whole. Because that was more important now than getting his inheritance back. That was more important now than going and living in that house with his family again. Because this was the most important thing in his life. Because Jesus reached down and touched him and made him whole. It gave his life a new purpose. It gave him all new goals, all new purpose for living. Now, I would like to think that everyone standing in this room, sitting in this room today, has had that experience. That's why you're here. Because at some point in your life, Jesus reached down and touched you. He touched you, he touched your life, and he made you whole. He gave you a new purpose. He said, you are now part of my inheritance. You are a child of God and a disciple of mine. And we as disciples have a call to go out and spread this experience. And we're ashamed to do it. We're scared to do it. And this man who has a call not to is so touched by his experience with Christ that he feels he must go out and share this. So, as you go out of here this week, I want you to stop and meditate and think about what was this experience in your life of Christ touching you? And how has that changed your life? And how is that supposed to change your life? Thank you. I think Belcanto's coming back up now, yeah.